Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. It's Bailey, and I hope you're having a great Wednesday or whenever you're listening to today's episode. I also hope you had a great Easter and got to spend it with friends or family and just the people closest to you. Today's episode, I do want to give a slight disclaimer. If you've ever struggled with disordered eating in the past, or know that this conversation is one that might be a slippery slope, like tracking your food intake or, tracking your calories, fat loss, weight loss, I really want to encourage you not to listen to today's episode. It's one that I wish I would have had when I was kind of in the thick of wanting to lose weight because I was just very uncomfortable in my body, but didn't know how to do it in a healthy way. That's really what I'm trying to share on today's episode. But again, if it is like one of those conversations that might leave you kind of going too far one direction, right? Of really tracking calories, obsessing over food, not feeling good in your body. I really don't want you to listen to today's episode. And of course, I just want to give that disclaimer because I know that this conversation is a highly requested one. I feel like a lot of the times clients will come to me with weight loss or fat loss as a main focus. And although that is a great byproduct, I always say, of living a healthy lifestyle, it is not everything, and you don't need to always be in a state of wanting to lose weight, needing to lose weight, wanting to lose fat, needing to lose fat. But sometimes you find yourself in seasons of life where that is kind of what you're wanting to do, what you're wanting to focus on. That is definitely where I find myself in right now, wanting to focus on fat loss, just as I'm now postpartum. There are just some changes I want to see in my body, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But again, it all goes back to how you're approaching it. I'll be very, very honest with you. When I lost my most weight, I was not doing it in a healthy way. So now I'm trying to take a different approach and have more structure around it, truthfully, and an overall better relationship with my food, or with food and with my body. If you are interested in learning more about my story in that regard, I would go back and listen to the first episode I ever recorded, where I get pretty raw and real on my health journey. But to just give you a snippet of it, when I was in my third year of college, which was technically my senior year of college because I graduated a year early, I had gained about, 30 pounds when I went to college my freshman year, and then I spent the next 2 years trying to lose it. And that looked like going low carb, meaning I completely avoided all breads, pastas, rices, cereals. I also went very, very low calorie, so about 1,200 calories a day is what I was consuming, which is way too low. And I was, for the first year, really just focusing on not really eating anything. And I tracked my food then for a year, and then I continued to track it for another year. So 2 years of tracking food. And that second year is when I really started over-exercising while continuing to under-eat. So although this led to almost a 35-pound weight loss over 2 years, it was not done in a healthy way, and it led to a lot of obsession around food, honestly, it all stemmed out of just my truthfully hatred for my physical body, and I don't want that for you. So I don't want this episode to be toxic or sound toxic in how I'm going to talk about food, and I really don't believe it will. But at any point, if this conversation feels like it's too much for you or you feel uncomfortable, please, like I said, exit the episode, and obviously, my feelings would not be hurt by that. I want you to do what you feel comfortable with, and I know in past seasons of my life, I would not have felt comfortable. Even just talking about fat loss or weight loss, it's still something I struggle with because I never want that to be somebody's primary focus. When that is all you're focused on, all you care about, I think it leads to a lot of disappointment and a lot of discontentment. Truthfully, I would say there's few points in my life when I've actually been content with my physical body, and I do, and in the past for sure, have done a lot of work with clients on healing their relationship with food and their body, and I think that always has to come first. It also is super helpful to have people around you where if they see you start to get on that slippery slope of, okay, you're tracking food and now you're obsessing over food and need control over your food all the time, to have people around you that can call you out on that and just make sure that you don't get to that point again, I think is really helpful and is something that I'm leaning more into now that I am tracking food intake. And it's something I honestly would cringe at if I would see anybody else sharing about it in the past, just because I don't believe that we always have to do that. But I think for, like I said, seasons of life, it can be helpful. Make sure that you feel like you have a good relationship with food and yourself, or you have people around you that can also call you out on it if they notice you start to fall into those older habits or patterns. So I just wanted to put that out there. Again, if this conversation might feel a little iffy for you, listen to the catch up and then for sure leave the conversation. Otherwise, I really hope to give you some very positive and tangible tactics to actually losing fat, which is different than losing weight. So I'm not really going to talk about weight loss because I think a lot of the talk around weight loss is pretty negative, truthfully, or the products that people try to get you to buy or the foods people try to get you to eat just so you lose weight. I really don't think that should be our goal. I think our goal should be fat, because when we think about sickness and disease, that gets stored in fat. So if you can lose fat, I really think your overall health will be much more supported. And it also looks a lot more like adding things into your lifestyle to make it positive versus removing and restricting, which is where I see a lot of the conversation around weight loss go. So we're going to get into all of that and more, but I want to give you a little bit of a catch up. I did take off last week from recording, so I want to catch up with you a little bit and also talk about how I'm nourishing my mind, body, and spirit, which is that segment of the podcast that I do every week just to really share and show how wellness really requires you to focus on all three. And when you focus on all three, I truly do believe you can live a truly well and balanced and healthy lifestyle. Which is also why this podcast is called Nourish with Purpose. We're not just talking about nourishing our body with food, but nourishing our mind and spirit, all three together. So to catch up with you, I'm trying to think of really what has happened. I feel like now that I am, about 6 weeks postpartum, I feel like I've gone into some pretty okay rhythms and routines. Oliver, for the most part, has a pretty consistent schedule. He's usually eats and then he's up for an hour and then he sleeps for a couple hours. That's kind of his pattern throughout the day. And last night we had 4-hour stretches, which is really big for him, where he would go without eating. So that's been super nice to, really just have about 4 hours of sleep. I get up and feed him and then another 4 hours of sleep. Very grateful for that. So we're hoping that pattern is consistent. But outside of that, I really feel like now that Nathan, this is his first week of taking his paternity leave. He took 2 weeks after Oliver was born, and now we really have the next month together. At least next month, I'm off of work still until May 19th, and he's off until June. So trying to get outside, get things done. I definitely want to be spending time outside while the weather is super nice. So I got outside and actually cleaned up my garden boxes. I need to plan out what I'm going to actually be planting this year. Last year, I planted a ton of different things, and I did a whole area with flowers, and it was just way too much for me to manage on my own. And so I'm definitely doing something a little bit smaller scale this year. And I have some raised garden beds. So I prepped those, also raked the area around them. Need to get some more soil to top off the boxes, but otherwise those will be ready once I make kind of that game plan of what flowers I'm going to plant and then what veggies I'm going to put in the garden. And then we have some fun house projects. And I'm curious if you and I don't know if you follow me over on Instagram, but are interested in house project content or just seeing like the progression of projects. I love seeing that when people post that, but I know most of what I talk about and share is health related. So it's kind of outside of my target maybe audience of people that do follow me, but I really would like to spruce up the front of our house this year, make it look a little bit more welcoming. Most people also come to our back door just with how our layout of our house is. And so I actually went to Home Goods with my mom. We were honestly there for probably about 2 hours finding kind of like a little shoe area that I could put in our house, but that doesn't look tacky or flimsy. So I found that in some wicker baskets. I know what color I'm going to paint the walls. We have like a wooden wall, so I need to wooden wall. It's like a wooden slats. I need to sand that down and then paint, get some of that wainscoting, like plywood board to put in a couple nooks. And then I also got some really fun peel and stick tile. That area is eventually not going to be there. We have plans to pour a new basement, pick up our house, and actually move it and then add on. That is definitely much down the road, but I want that nook just to look inviting, especially because people always come to our back door. So I'm really wanting to spruce that up now this next month that I have some time off, get some patio furniture, kind of figuring out what that could look like. Also painting our house. It's super interesting. We had a bad storm in our area a few years ago, and with that, the previous owners replaced the siding of the house and some windows, I believe, but they didn't replace the siding on the front of the house that was protected by the porch. So we want to spruce up the porch area and actually paint the brick. The brick is already painted, otherwise I would not touch it, but it's painted like a really, in my opinion, kind of ugly red color. So I want to paint it maybe like a deep green. I am not a black person. There is nothing like that dark in my house. I don't have any black accents or painted rooms. Everything is pretty light and airy. So I want that to match, look a little bit more earthy, not so like black and white. So that is another project I'm hoping to get done. So there's just a lot of things. I want to get some fake ferns to hang in potted baskets on our porch. I feel like that is just what I need to do with outside plants. I'm somebody who would like to garden and raise flowers, but when it comes to landscaping, because we know we're going to pick up our house eventually and move it, we have not invested a lot in landscaping. And also, I don't necessarily have a passion for that. I would much rather grow produce or grow flowers, like cut flowers, and not necessarily tend to so many things around the house. So I'm actually probably going to get some fake plants, which sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, you never have to worry about them dying, and they really look like green and vibrant all summer long. So those are kind of some things we're focusing on. We're also going to be renovating our bathroom. We are still waiting on a quote. It's been a few weeks now since he said he would get us a quote, but if you know of any contractors in the Nebraska area, send them, well, not Nebraska, more of like Lincoln, further west area, just let me know, because I feel like we have, we inquired about this in November and we are still waiting on a quote. So I've got so many things picked out. We know what it's going to look like for the most part. We just need to get it done. And we, as in Nathan and I, are not the type of people to take on a home renovation project that extreme. I don't know the first thing about it or the first thing about plumbing, electricity. So we definitely need to hire out, but it's been fun to kind of plan out what the bathroom's going to look like. And now it's just kind of that waiting game. Outside of that, kind of some updates on the farm. We have some new baby chickens, which they're really my mom's. I'm not really taking care of them too much, but we've got 5 chickens that we actually got from the school because they raised them from eggs, and then they hatched, and then we adopted them. So we've got some baby chickens. We actually just found, one baby bunny while Nathan was mowing. They were in a little nest, and then they kind of scattered, and there was one left in the nest. So that's kind of a highlight of the day. Today that I'm recording it is actually Earth Day, Tuesday. So I'm like, well, this is kind of like a peak of Earth Day. I know that bunnies can find their nest now, so I'm a little less worried about them, but they are just so stinking cute, and I have to fight the urge to want to keep the little bunny we found just because they're the cutest things, and I would love to have a pet bunny, but also don't want to take it out of its natural environment. And then also we've had some really, I would say it's kind of like entering into that wedding season. So we had a couple engagement parties the last couple of weekends, and then celebrated Easter with my family on Sunday. So really has been full of a lot of socializing, a lot of seeing people, and also just a lot of time at home. Kind of a good mix of both, I would say. And the weather is so nice, so definitely getting outside and going for walks as much as we can. So then how I'm nourishing my mind, I've really started reading again, which I always feel like I have a book that I'm reading, but never like actively reading it every single day until I started reading The Last Letter. And this is by Rebecca. I don't know her last name. It is the same author that wrote The Fourth Wing, which I think is a really popular book right now that I'm now just starting. But The Last Letter, I could not put that book down. And it's not because it was like a groundbreaking book, but I just grew so close to the characters in the book. And yeah, while I was breastfeeding Oliver, was reading the book while we were taking a contact nap. More so he was sleeping, I was reading. I just really could not put it down. So it's been super fun to jump back into that. And now I'm going to be I've started The Fourth Wing as an entertainment book. And then I'm also starting The Web That Has No Weaver, which is really about traditional Chinese medicine and comparing it to Western medicine, giving clinical research behind both and how they're effective. I think my thing with traditional Chinese medicine is, although I do believe so strongly in taking a holistic approach, TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, is one that is almost so woo that I'm like, really, can our emotions influence how our body feels that much, right? Or if I have a fuzzy coating on my tongue, does that really mean that I'm having digestive distress, or I've consumed too many cool foods and that's why I have mucus in my throat? I definitely believe that, and I've seen it all firsthand within myself, but sometimes it seems so out there that you're like, I don't know, is this truly legit? So I'm really excited to dive into that and hopefully have some new practices or ideas to add into the client work that I'm going to do once I return. How I am nourishing my body is I've actually started strength training with my mom, which is kind of tying into today's episode for sure, because like I said, fat loss in this season of my life is my goal. And so my mom and I have actually started strength training together. We have a date at 4:30, 5 times a week that we meet to just hit different body or different muscle groups. And so I've actually had my brother create a plan for us. He did mine when I was pregnant. He created the plan. Now he's just tweaked it a little bit. So we were doing that together. And it's just been really fun to be able to do that with her. And it's honestly become a highlight of my day. It also gets me out of the house because I go over to their house. They have a full weight room, which is just super nice. And then how I'm nourishing my spirit. I would say Easter is definitely always a time for that. It's my favorite holiday, and I love so much about it. Obviously, the death and resurrection of Christ is something that every year it just blows me away, the love that he has for us to literally, God sent his son to die on a cross for our sins, and now we have eternal life. The whole concept is just always so deep and impactful, and it makes me feel just so grateful to have a relationship with Christ and to believe that there is a higher power, which is God. It just creates so much certainty in my own personal life, and a lot of comfort comes around that, even around the topics of death. I just really feel at peace with a lot of things in my life, and even the conversation around death, because I know there's something so much bigger after I live this life, for my eternal life. So I don't know, all of that is just, Easter is just always such a good reminder, and I love being able to spend time with my family on Easter. And I also love that Easter's on a Sunday. I just feel like going to church in the morning and then spending time with family, it just creates a really special day and a really special time. Okay, so we are going to move into, of course, the bulk of today's episode, which, like I said, is about fat loss. So we're going to talk about calorie deficits, tracking your food intake, what you should do nutritionally, the purpose of muscle gain, and how you can really make this work with your lifestyle. So I'm not going to say that there isn't a sacrifice that comes with this, right? There's going to be some level of sacrifice, some level of dedication of time. But if you are truly wanting to lose fat, what I'm about to tell you will be a great place to start doing that. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, right? Because for a lot of us, accountability is a huge component of that. I do work with clients one-on-one around fat loss if that is their goal, but truthfully, I think there's so much else that has to come before we even get to this stage. And so again, I'm sharing this with you, but there's so much that needs to come before this. And so when you are thinking about fat loss, before you even think if you are the person that this podcast is created for, I want you to ask yourself a few questions, right? Because in different seasons of life, this might apply more or less to you, but I don't believe that having a focus in general around fat loss is necessarily toxic. Now, that has taken a lot of growth on my part to view it not as toxic. I had recognized that it was more of a reflection of my own discomfort around food and discomfort on my body that led me to think that anybody who tracked food intake or was wanting to lose fat was approaching it in a toxic way. That is not the case, and I really don't believe that to be the case. And especially now as I'm actively practicing this, I don't believe it's toxic. But it can be if you have not taken the work to heal your relationship with food or at least reflect on your relationship with food. So again, a couple of questions to ask yourself first is, if I start tracking my food intake, am I in a place mentally where I won't overdo it or take things too fast? Again, a projection of my own, history of this is if MyFitnessPal would tell me to eat 1,600 calories in a day, I would for sure want to be well under that because, the faster or the less you eat, the faster you can lose weight. That was my mentality. So if I could be at 1,200 calories instead of 1,600 calories, I was going to do everything in my power to do that. I do not believe that is a healthy way to approach this and no longer practice that. But at one point in my life, I was going to take any little bit and make it extreme. And so that is where you need to take the time to reflect is, if you start tracking food again, or period, is it something you feel like you could do for 1 to 6 weeks, depending on what your goals are, in a healthy way? Second question to ask yourself is, how does food currently make me feel emotionally? Is there any stress around it, or are there any food groups that I'm still restricting? Like I said, when I started on this journey in 2020, I completely or tried to completely cut out any starchy carbs. That looked like, I said, rice, pasta, bread, cereals, oatmeal. I tried to cut that all out because I thought that carbohydrates, starchy carbs specifically, were the evil one, right? They were the component that was causing me to gain weight and not be able to lose it. Reflecting back, I know it was definitely my lifestyle, especially my freshman year of college, of overeating, eating late at night, drinking alcohol, right? There's so many factors that were at play, lack of sleep, that I was not thinking about or did not think were influencing my weight gain, and they 100% were. It was not the piece of bread that I was having. However, there are some adjustments you can make nutritionally that we will talk about. So I really got the idea about this episode as well when I was just on Facebook, and I think Facebook it's a certain demographic that really is on Facebook a lot. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I think it tends to be more of like the 30 plus age group. And I started to recognize that there's an age of women that are selling an eating disorder. And I know that sounds really extreme, and I'm not going to expose the diet programs, the wellness, I would not say they're wellness companies, but they'll label them as a wellness company out there that are contributing to women having a really disordered way of eating, and they don't even recognize it, right? Being on a granola bar diet, doing a diet program that has, or a weight loss program or a fat loss program that has you buying a bunch of food just so you can follow their program, is not legit, and it's not a long-term solution. It's also not something that looks like buying all the sugar-free, fat-free, low-carb, keto products under the sun, because those are lower in calorie. I personally do not care about that, right? Like if somebody was going to come to me and say, I want to lose weight, I would never, ever, ever recommend sugar-free and fat-free products for sure. Your body and your brain need the fat, and sugar is not evil. An overabundance of sugar is what can cause some issues, okay? But more so in a blood sugar regulation standpoint, not so much as you're going to gain so much weight if you eat a bunch of sugar. You honestly just aren't going to feel very good. And this came to me because I saw this post, and this gal was talking about her story around losing weight. And again, I'm not saying this to criticize or make fun of her, because I was at this point 4 to 5 years ago. Like, I've been here. So when I see this, I feel like I need to call it out, because this is what I used to believe losing weight, losing fat had to look like. And it was a bed of iceberg lettuce with a tiny bit of cheese, a tiny bit of shredded ham, and then a couple carrots. And then she was using the skinny girl dressing. That is sad. Like, the view of that food, is sad, right? Like, looking at that, it also makes me really, really sad to see people eat that for lunch and think that that is the way that it needs to look to lose weight or to lose fat. It does not need to look like that. It honestly needs to look the opposite of that. And it needs to have color, and it needs to have texture, and it needs to have flavor. And if you find yourself in that pattern of eating something like that, eating something bland, or eating chicken and rice and veggies for every single meal, I'm not saying that can't still be interesting, but I want you to take a step back and look at, okay, am I actually fueling my body in a way that feels good, feels comfortable, feels exciting, feels inspiring, or does putting together my meal feel kind of like, ugh? Like, do I really look at that plate of iceberg lettuce and think, man, I can't wait to eat this? And I'm not saying that everything we eat should be an immersive experience, but it should not look restrictive. It doesn't mean there's not going to be some calorie deficit situations happening, but it shouldn't look or feel extremely restrictive. And that's where, again, I think it's important that you work with, or you have people around you that also recognize that and want to support you in something different, right? It does not need to look like that. It does not need to look like buying every product from a certain company just to lose weight, because they, again, have a granola bar diet that they're going to put you on that maybe is super high protein, low carb, and that's how you're going to lose your weight. I'm not saying they maybe don't work. I'm saying for long-term success and long-term results, I do not believe that is the answer. And a huge piece of why I don't believe that's the answer is because they're not selling fat loss, they're selling weight loss. Oftentimes, you will not see an exercise program linked hand in hand with a dietary focused program. And that's where there's an issue, right? Because yes, you can lose weight and you can feel good in your body. And again, I don't think it's a bad thing, but weight is focused on weight overall in your body, right? So that looks like typically losing first your muscle mass, because oftentimes if you're in such a calorie deficit that you can't exercise because you don't have the energy, you're going to lose your muscle mass. You're also going to lose fat, yes, maybe, but you're also going to lose water weight. So I think the component with weight loss that is really alarming and should fire a lot of alarms in your mind if you see somebody talking about weight loss is that they are so focused on overall weight, they're not necessarily focused on building muscle mass. What I love around the focus of fat loss is when you are losing fat, you're typically building muscle at the same time. That's because any good fat loss focused program is going to be linked hand in hand with strength training, okay? Or with movement to start and then progressing into strength training. Fat loss focuses on an overall reduction of fat while keeping your muscle. Again, weight loss, you're trying to lose everything and anything. Fat loss, you're only focused on losing fat and you want to keep muscle, but that also means you have to be focused on building muscle. So typically when people say they want to lose weight, they don't recognize that there's actually a difference in your approach to each one. 10 out of 10 times, I'm going to recommend fat loss over weight loss, even if you feel like you have maybe an abundance of weight to lose. Still focusing on fat loss, it might take longer to see results, but I really do think is the better approach. And so why, I think this kind of leads me to ask myself that question of like, why do we want to focus on fat loss versus weight loss? Again, even if you would have an abundance or even just a little bit of overall weight to lose, the approach to fat loss focuses on supporting your body and giving it enough, while weight loss focuses on leaving your body depleted and restricting. Oftentimes, like I said, that lack of muscle or your muscle mass is actually deteriorating. This is why you'll see, I would say more specifically in the holistic space, health space or nutrition space, people aren't super fond of GLP-1s or weight loss medications, and that really is because a lot of it is due to muscle mass. I would say a lot of the times, I should not make that claim. But I would say if you're taking something like that, you should just be pairing it with building muscle. If you are taking that without moving your body, I think there's going to be an issue there, especially with that muscle mass conversation. So why don't diet companies sell fat loss? They usually, in all caps will be weight loss. They don't necessarily specify fat loss. It doesn't require you, this is the thing about fat loss, it doesn't require you spending money on any certain products to get there. It might take longer to see results. That's also a negative if they're trying to sell you a product. If you take that product, they want to see results fast. So typically it looks like losing overall weight, not necessarily fat. And again, it takes physical activity and actively building muscle to enhance the process of burning fat. And most diet programs are not, again, linking strength training to eating differently or to taking a product. So how can you get started with fat loss? So first off, you're going to want to take measurements versus weighing yourself. Again, we're not necessarily focused on how much you weigh. We're focused on what the measurements of your body are, because that is going to show the physical changes that are occurring in your body as you build muscle, right? So knowing what you weigh in general can be helpful as you're initially getting started, because when you calculate your protein intake or your water intake, which I'm actually going to include in today's episode, you do want to have a general idea of what you weigh. It's not a bad thing to weigh yourself, but really be aware of what you can handle. Like for me, I have not weighed myself since I was pregnant, so I don't know necessarily what I weigh. That is because I truthfully still don't have a great relationship with the scale, knowing what I weigh. I also think that the scale only shows you such a tiny, tiny glimpse at what your physical body looks like. But as somebody who has struggled with body dysmorphia, every time I look in the mirror, I feel like I look different. So knowing what I weigh does not necessarily feel helpful for me. And it's not something I'm interested in knowing. I would rather be more aware of how my clothes are feeling or what my measurements of specific body parts are to know if they're changing or as they're changing. Again, they would be becoming smaller or shrinking, but staying toned if you are losing fat versus if you're just overall losing weight. That is what you're going to see on the scale. But again, know your relationship with the scale. If getting on there still doesn't feel comfy for you, that is fine. For me, as much work as I feel like I've done and as much as I've grown around my relationship with food and my body and the scale, I still don't have a great relationship with knowing what I weigh. And it's still something I don't put myself in that environment because I know it's just not good for me. So again, if you are focused around losing fat, the scale might not actually change that much. If you're building muscle and replacing the fat with muscle, you might not see huge shifts happen on the scale. So that's where I think measurements versus weighing yourself is really important. So you're going to take measurements of your biceps, your waist, so the smallest part of your waist, your hips, and then that mid thigh. And using just like a loose measure to do that can be really helpful. Or you could do before or after pictures, not necessarily after, but do a photo now and then really don't think about these measurements. Think about what the photo looks like, even think about what you weigh if that's the approach you're taking for like at least, I would say 6 weeks. Okay. And I know that might be hard. I've also worked with women who chronically weigh themselves and every single day they're obsessing over what the number on the scale is. So really know where you're at. Like I said, maybe for you, it looks like weighing yourself every other day and then weighing yourself once a week and then weighing yourself once every 2 weeks and just adjust as you feel comfortable. That's something that I think when you work one-on-one with someone can be really helpful because they can guide you through this process versus you feeling like you're alone and you have to kind of have that self-control or discipline by yourself, which can be really difficult. Another way that you can assess is how your clothes fit. So if you're like, I don't really want to get that nitpicky, I'm just going to assess how my clothes fit, that can also be helpful. But I really think the measurements is key here just because, again, as you build muscle, that circumference should really become smaller or it will become firmer because you're building, like I said, muscle in that area. So again, Assess if you're in the right place right now to approach this in a really healthy way. The emotional component also is a factor here when you think about getting started. And that really comes down to what you're saying to yourself, how you view yourself, what do you believe around yourself or your body. And then also, do your emotions impact how you fuel your body, how you eat? Right? So do you constantly find yourself stress eating or stopping for fast food after work versus making something at home because you never feel like you have enough time? Do you have that belief that your body isn't worthy of love or attention? Or do you feel uncomfortable in your skin or often say, why would I even try XYZ? It's not going to work for me. I think I really hear that a lot is women have tried these diets, they've tried these fads, they've tried these programs. And so it's like, why would I believe this was going to work for me? That belief in itself is probably a huge component of why it's not working for you, right? And I know that might be really brutally honest, but you can't continue to look at your body and say awful things or not believe in something and then really fully invest your time into it, right? You're not going to fully invest yourself or your time into something if you don't actually, to your core, believe it's going to work for you. Another one here, do you have any major stressors that need to be let go of? Maybe it's a job, maybe it's a friendship, something that needs to kind of leave your life for a moment of time while you work on focusing on yourself and your physical body and your physical health. And then maybe you can approach that relationship or work through both at the same time. Again, guidance in that, maybe therapy, working with a coach can be helpful if that is the case. And then have others made comments around your weight or your body that still trigger you and put you into a spiral. I know there was a time that I was working at St. Elizabeth Hospital and my boss had these polos, they were super ugly, that we were supposed to wear to work. And he was like, what size are you? You're obviously a medium. And although that might not sound like you're obviously a medium triggering to anybody else, as somebody who my entire life, I feel like my focus up until recently, and honestly, if I'm being honest, probably is still subconsciously a focus, is to be as small as possible. Obviously look healthy, but I feel like that was for so long, all I wanted was to be as tiny as possible. And so to hear somebody be like, well, you're obviously this size. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be that size, but again, I wanted to be as small as possible. So hearing that and having somebody maybe make an assumption around my body sent me into a spiral. I remember getting home and I was in a really, really bad mood. And again, I was like, I don't need to eat anything. I'm not going to eat supper. I'm not hungry. It was honestly probably more so out of a state of thinking I need to go back into the pattern of restriction that I had always had because somebody thought something of me. And I think I've always really cared what other people think, especially cared what people think I look like. And that's something that I'm just being very honest with you right now because it's something I'm always working through and I don't feel like I've mastered in any capacity is like not caring what people think or caring about what I look like. Because I do care and I don't think there's anything wrong with caring. I think when it becomes really toxic for you or really harmful for your physical body, for you to care so much that you undereat or you overexercise, that's obviously when it becomes a problem, which is where I found myself 5 years ago. So, if you feel like there are people around you that are not positive or not encouraging, maybe again, it's best if they're not in your life for that period of time while you work on either healing your relationship with yourself or focusing on really supporting your body and your health in a way like focusing on fat loss. So those are some things that, again, you need to assess your relationship with this all first, assess your stressors, and assess like if you feel like there's anything you need to release or give up because your body can hold on to that, right? Holding on and water retention, so holding on to weight in the form of water retention is a stress response of your body. It's why when you get your period, you notice extra swelling maybe around your midsection, you feel a little bit puffier around your face. Your body's protecting itself, right? Although yes, your body's probably anticipating your monthly cycle. At the same time, losing blood through, when you're in your menstrual cycle, that is really kind of I wouldn't say it's traumatic, but it's stress on your body. So when you feel that stress on your body's going to retain more water to protect itself. And then you might notice the week after your period, when you're actively bleeding the week after, you don't feel so puffy. You feel like everything looks back to how it maybe did before. Again, it's your body's way of protecting itself. For me, when I had my low back injury, I noticed just in looking back at photos how much water my body was retaining in the form of inflammation, right? So chronic inflammation is going to lead your body to hold on to water to protect itself. And oftentimes, hold on to fat could also be a component, again, as that protection mechanism. So you really want to be able to release things emotionally, especially when it comes to stress, and overall just create an environment for your body to thrive and not feel like it's constantly being beaten down by your thoughts and your actions. All right, so then moving into nutritionally, this is what we're focusing on when it comes to fat loss. You're looking at high protein. So this is 1 to 1.2 times your body weight in pounds. That's how many grams of protein you're looking at per day. For a lot of you, if you do that calculation, again, 1 to 1.2, I would say 1.2 if you are working out maybe 5 to 6 times a week. You're also, getting those steps in, maybe 8 to 10,000 steps. You've got a pretty active job. I'd go on that higher on that, or 1 just as a general baseline. If you're like, okay, I'm wanting to look more into fat loss and I'm also going to increase physical activity, then I would do 1. So 1 or 1.2 times your body weight in pounds. Now that might look like a lot of protein. For me, my goal, depending on the exercise that I log in my tracker, which I'll explain what I'm using, it's like 172 grams of protein is actually what I ate yesterday. And I was still in a deficit, but eating 172 grams of protein. Now that is so much protein and I really felt good. But if that number for you feels very overwhelming, I would take whatever number you got and divide it by how many meals you eat per day. Then that way, you're going to have your 3 meals per day plus a snack. Okay, that makes it feel a little bit more tangible. Also, if you're doing supplemental protein, I share this often, you really don't want to go above 30 grams of protein in a serving if it's supplemental, meaning if it's a granola bar or a powder. You really want to only go above that 30 if it's like an animal-based protein, in my opinion, like a steak or chicken, pork tenderloin. That is when you can go above that 30. And most steaks, even if you do a 4-ounce steak, is probably going to have about 40 grams of protein. So you really just want to make sure, again, if it's supplemental, you're not doing too much because that can really mess with your digestive system. But something I've also utilized and shared about, which I have no affiliation with, is Perfect Aminos. It is a powder, but I take it with my electrolytes in my water. I've really gotten on the kick of zhuzhing up my water, and then that way it's more enjoyable to drink. So like mid-afternoon, I'll do a scoop of Perfect Aminos, a scoop of electrolytes, and then my energy drops that I've gotten postpartum. Those are from Anya, the brand, but Perfect Aminos is by Body Health, and 99% of the protein in that product is actually absorbed and utilized within your body. Whereas like protein powders or eggs or even food is not 100% or even 99% utilized in your body to then support muscle growth. So that is what I've added in, just like I said, in the afternoon, which has been super helpful to reach my protein goal without having to eat so much. I can just have it in a beverage. But again, I'm not selling you a product because then I'm just feeding into the whole diet culture piece. I really just like that my body's able to utilize that, and it's kind of just a plus. I'm still trying to get 100% of my protein intake from real food, and then anything more is going to come from a supplemental form, typically of protein, which would be that Perfect Aminos. But protein is really what is going to keep you full the longest. It's also going to stabilize blood sugar. You really, really want to do high protein. Again, if you're building muscle, which is something I'm going to get to, but is so, so, so important that we cannot forget when this is a focus. Next, you're also going to do high fiber, right? So cooked vegetables in-season fruit. What I really like about Chronometer, and that's where I track everything in, which was recommended to me from a client, is they look at calories as energy. So it doesn't say calories, it says energy. They also give you your micronutrients. So when you swipe over on the app, you can actually see the micronutrients you're getting from each meal. So again, your fruits and vegetables are not going to give you high protein, but they're going to give you micronutrients that also support your body, support your overall health, support digestion, brain function. So high fiber also keeps things going. So bowel movements should be happening. If you do high protein without high fiber, you're probably going to be pretty constipated. You might even notice your kidneys hurt. If you're very in tune with your body, that would be kind of your upper to mid back would actually ache. That is if you do high protein without enough plant fiber or, the fiber from cooked vegetables or fruits. You can notice a really strong impact on your kidneys. So you want to make sure you're pooping once or twice a day. I know not the most glamorous thing to talk about, but that's where we can keep that regularity when we focus on high protein if it is paired with high fiber. So when I think about my plate, I'm thinking about eating my protein first, and then I'm thinking about having about half my plate be full of cooked vegetables. And then what I'll do typically as like a dessert, unless it's supper, I always have something very sweet for supper. I'll actually share something I've been doing recently too in a little bit with my dessert, and it's been so good and also helped me reach that protein goal. Oh my gosh, what was I saying? I'll do like a piece of fruit then to kind of close my meal. So if I'm doing like this morning, this is a very odd example. I had a 4-ounce steak for breakfast. That was just in our fridge. And then I had a lactation muffin. So that is my protein. The lactation muffin was my carbohydrate. It was also healthy fat. And then I had 2 cuties as like to kind of close out my meal, and that was my something sweet. So if you find yourself really wanting to close your meal with something sweet, I'm not saying don't have dessert because I have dessert every single day, but I would say for most meals, except for maybe that last meal of the day, I would recommend doing something like fruit as that sweet component, having that at the end of your meal. So I would also say lower starchy carbohydrate intake, and this does not even mean low carb. The reason why I think people believe and why I have always thought low carb works is because you're consuming less calories overall. And I do think there's validity to that, but I think honestly, so much of what we might grab for as a snack is a carb. And that is fine if it's a fruit or vegetable, right? But I'm thinking starchy carbs like crackers or chips, or if I'm in a crunch, it's like, well, what can I grab? If I don't have any protein bars, or if I don't have any Chomps beef sticks, the next thing I think is like, well, I guess I'll have some crackers. That is not necessarily the best thing for you to do in that situation, right? Best thing for me to do. I should always be looking for a high protein source. Animal protein is my preferred type of protein, but starchy carbs, really they break down into glucose, which is that sugar. So that is then absorbed into your bloodstream, and that can rise your blood sugar levels. And this is an issue if you're lacking in protein, right? So if you're eating something if you're eating something that is a starchy carb mid-afternoon, barely any protein in your body, you're going to notice a spike in blood sugar. You might notice a dip in energy. You might feel shaky or jittery, feel like you have a headache, or you're just exhausted. That is probably because you're not doing enough protein before you have that starchy carb. I think starchy carbs are honestly just always around us, right? Even when I think about, again, in the past, I've done low carb, but even think now, like if I was to go to a restaurant and get a bowl of soup that was like a chicken noodle soup, you're going to get the starchy carb from the noodles, and then they're probably going to give you a slice of bread to go on the side. Not a bad thing. I'm not saying those things are bad, but I'm saying that's very, very low protein, pretty high starchy carb. So you want to find that balance, not even balance. You want to find that, find a way to really make sure you're always getting more protein than you are starchy carb. So if I'm building a plate again and I have a 6-ounce pork tenderloin, I'm going to maybe do 1/4 cup of rice, and then the rest of my plate is going to be cooked vegetables. That is what I would want a plate to look like, again, if my focus is fat loss. And that is because I'm having about 40 grams of protein in that steak alone, and then with 1/4 cup of rice, That's probably, I don't even know how many grams of carbohydrates. And again, I don't get that nitpicky. I don't think about that. I think about just looking at my plate visually. Where can I add the most protein, the most cooked vegetables, and then where can I fill in the gaps with my fat and my starchy carb. So that is, again, how I'm adjusting my meals. This is going to look different if it's weight loss. It's also going to look different if you are just in a calorie maintenance phase. Again, I'm getting specific on what plates look like because the focus is fat loss. Oftentimes, what I also see in blood work, which is why I have to bring up the starchy carb conversation, is I see insulin resistance or pre-diabetic ranges. So this means we have to overall lower our intake of our starchy carbs and add in habits that support your blood sugar levels, right? So supporting your blood sugar levels looks like adding in a post-nourishment walk, swapping out the breads, pastas, etc. for maybe a potato. Still starchy, but it's a great source of fiber and it's a great starchy carb. It's also very filling, right? A baked potato is going to be more filling than a small fry at McDonald's. It just is. So again, maybe even just adjusting what that potato looks like, or squash. And then of course, eating enough protein, eating that first on your plate to make sure you always have enough protein. Then you move to your veggies, then you move to your starchy carb, then you move to your fruit. Again, that's getting very nitpicky, and that's something that I naturally do. But that is, again, because protein is always the focus. So I'm not having my piece of bread first, because if I ate a piece of bread, I'd want to just continue eating more and more bread. It has its time and place 100%. I'm not saying that if I make a fresh sourdough loaf, I'm not having multiple pieces in a day, but I'm trying to, as much as I can, focus on eating protein on my plate first. You also then want to lower your overall sugar intake, period, right? Like, I'm not saying you can't have sugar. Again, I have sugar every single day. One of my favorite parts of my day is actually making my homemade coffee syrups and adding that to a latte. An iced latte is just so good, and that is obviously full of sugar. Sugar is not evil, but sugar doesn't really make you feel that great, and it doesn't really have much nutritional value unless you're using it as that pre-workout. So sometimes for pre-workout, I'll do like dates with honey and a little bit of nut butter. That can be a great pre-workout. It's going to give you energy and it's going to fuel that workout. Then, of course, after your workout, you're going to want to focus on something high in protein. But I'm not saying it doesn't have its time and place, but you're going to focus on adding in more maple syrup, more honey, coconut sugar, or cane sugar if you're consuming it, and then just minimizing artificial sweeteners and high fructose corn syrup, and doing stevia and monk fruit in moderation. Now, the reason I say minimizing artificial sweeteners, that should be in all caps, honestly, and high fructose corn syrup as well. But artificial sweeteners, that is what you're going to get if you are like, okay, Bailey said if I want to lose fat, I should do no sugar. I'm not saying that, by the way, but if that's kind of how it gets translated in your mind, I'm not saying that you should go to Walmart and buy every sugar-free salad dressing they have. Because what you're going to find in those products is that they are full of just a bunch of crap, truthfully. Crappy ingredients, crappy sweeteners, lab-created sweeteners, sugar alcohols. Sugar alcohols are addictive. So although, yes, they might be low calorie or 0 calorie, your body just wants more and more and more because it is such an intense amount of sugar to get in one serving that your body craves it. You just and honestly, that you might even subconsciously be believing, well, this is 0 calories, I'm going to have as much as I want. Just because something is 0 calories doesn't mean it's good for you. Sugar alcohols, I would avoid sugar-free, fat-free foods like the plague, okay? I'm not saying they're all evil, but for the most part, it's artificial and it's full of crap. So when you think also about eating this way, we're thinking about fresh, whole foods, okay? It's not, okay, I'm going to eat high protein. I need to go to the grocery store and buy everything keto that they have. No, you're missing the point, right? The point is not to eat everything that you used to love and find a swap for it, right? So like tortillas. If you love a tortilla, I'm not saying now go buy the lowest calorie, high carb, or lowest calorie, high protein keto tortilla as your swap for a tortilla. Maybe just adjust how you eat. And I'm not saying, again, tortillas are not a bad thing, but I'm just using that as an example. You don't need to go and find a swap for something you love that is keto or high protein. You can really just enjoy that and make it work on your plate, right? It looks like having a cup of meat in your tortilla versus having 2 tortillas with a half a cup of meat in each. It's just those minor adjustments, which again, I think is really helpful when you work with somebody on the nutrition side, because again, it's just a subtle change like that. You don't need to go and buy everything that says keto because you're high protein. A lot of the time, those products are pretty crappy anyway. The ingredients are not great. I've also seen some swaps like using the Quest nutrition. They've got like some nacho chips as like your base. I think honestly, anything by Quest is probably pretty crappy, even though it's high protein, and you might be able to find chips that are high in protein. High protein means high animal protein. High protein doesn't necessarily mean go and find every carb that is high protein and eat that. And again, I'm not saying that to criticize you, because previous Bailey would be like, okay, if I'm going high protein, let me go buy Quest. Let me go buy anything that was extremely high in protein and low in sugar and low in fat, and let me eat that. I was very much in the beginning. I honestly would say this is kind of how people begin if they're on a weight loss journey or a fat loss journey or just a health journey. They kind of begin here, right? They begin with the fat-free, they begin with the sugar-free, they begin with the low carb, they begin with the keto, because as a society, that's kind of what we've been told is what works or what we need to do. And now looking back, I know I was completely missing the point. The point was not to be able to eat all the foods that I loved that were convenient and still live a healthy lifestyle. The point was to actually eat whole foods, from the earth foods, God-given foods, not lab-created or lab-manufactured foods, and just fuel my body well. Eat colorful foods, eat fresh foods, eat foods that help with my digestion and don't cause acne like all the sugar-free, fat-free stuff does, and really just have fun with it. Right? It does not need to look boring. Like the example I gave of iceberg lettuce, that is not what I would say is a good plate to be consuming. What I would say is if you're going to do a salad, first off, make it a Nourish bowl. So do, maybe a cup of lettuce at the bottom, but do a cup of protein on top. Do cooked vegetables on top. Do a homemade vinaigrette on top with a really good olive oil and lemon juice and Dijon and salt and pepper. And then add on homemade sourdough croutons and just nuts and seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, hemp hearts. Make it something so that when you eat it, you actually feel satisfied. It looks colorful. It looks enjoyable. The nutrition side of this should not feel necessarily restrictive. When I look at the calories, which again, the reason that I'm tracking is because I wanted to know that I was eating enough. And I think that's also how you know that you're in the right mindset to be tracking food, is if you look at tracking as a way of, I want to make sure I'm just eating enough food versus I want to look at how I can eat as little food as possible. Right? So how I view it is right now I'm breastfeeding. I'm also strength training 5 to 6 times a week and trying to walk for 45 to 60 minutes a day. Now that might sound very, very extreme. For me, that fits very comfortably into my lifestyle and I do not feel like I'm overdoing it. But that's also because the tempo of workouts that I'm doing has changed. It's not doing HIIT workouts for 45 minutes. It's strength training for 45 minutes. It's not going out and walking as fast as possible and trying to burn as many calories as possible by walking. It's like leisurely walking with my husband and my child in the stroller. It's not trying to, hurt my body by doing too much. It's doing enough and that feels comfortable for me. But again, when it comes to tracking, I'm like, if I'm doing that, I need to make sure I'm eating enough to have enough milk production first and foremost, right? My not sole responsibility, but a responsibility of mine right now is feeding my child. So I want to make sure that I am able to give him everything that he needs to be full every time he eats. And that looks like eating more food, right? It burns about 300 to 500 calories to breastfeed every single day. So that's automatic. That's automatically putting my body typically in a deficit. And what's nice about Chronometer, which is what I track in, is they actually factor that in. They factor in if you're breastfeeding, which is super cool. I've never found an app that does that. And so it tells you what you need to continue to have adequate milk supply while you're also exercising, and enough protein, enough fat, carbs, all the things. So it really does get pretty specific to your overall goal. But I want to make sure I'm eating enough. So again, this has not felt restrictive in any way to me. I honestly find myself eating more food now that I am focused on building muscle because I know I need to fuel my body adequately if I'm building muscle, because when you build muscle, that replaces the space where fat is, and that naturally occurs. Again, you have to give yourself time to see that change. And I definitely would say I've not seen that yet, but I'm along for the ride, right? I'm not in this for the quick fix. I'm in this for, okay, 4 months out, 6 months out, 8 months out, a year out. I want to feel good in my body. I want to feel strong first and foremost. Truthfully, I just want to feel strong again. After carrying a baby, I feel like my core is so stinking weak. And I hate that, right? It's just softer in the middle section, and that's fine, right? I know why that is, and it's that way because I carried a child, which is the biggest blessing. But that doesn't mean I don't want to get strength back in my core. Requires some fat loss in the area, some muscle building in the area. Just things that have to go hand in hand. All right, so then when we think about eating habits, again, you want to be typically in a calorie deficit, 200 to 300 calories max, I would say. Again, this is the long game. This isn't the short game. You're not trying to lose 10 pounds before the wedding next weekend. You're trying to lose weight at a comfortable pace, adjust your eating habits at a comfortable pace so that, yes, maybe it feels like there's a little bit of a little bit of a deficit in what you're eating. But it just takes some time adjusting, right? Like yesterday I had 178 grams of protein. Insane, and it did not feel difficult. I was kind of right at my calorie intake goal, and that's because I've been tracking for about a week and a half now, and I know how to adjust my plate in a way that's going to meet the goals that are set on the app. I also know that first and foremost, my body is going to tell me what it needs. So if I'm over calories for the day, if I've been tracking and I'm eating more than what the calories kind of allotted are, I'm going to continue to eat because my body is telling me that it's still hungry, right? I do not believe that an app can tell you everything about yourself because it can't. However, if every single day I was noticing I'm overindulging in a lot of things, or I'm over maybe that allotted calorie amount, I'm probably not going to be in a deficit, and I'm not in a deficit if I've been tracking everything correctly because I've continued to eat more. So that's where, again, you have to adjust. Well, if you're going to eat more, maybe you need to add in a little bit more movement, do some stretching, add in some yoga, just find like pockets in your day where you can add in more movement if you feel like you're always overeating. Because I would say that doesn't go without saying that for a period of time, you might feel like you need to eat a lot of food, but that's where you have to analyze your hunger and full signals. So that's, again, where I said I'm listening to my body. So if my stomach is actively growling and I feel like it's growling for probably like 15 to 30 minutes, and I kind of sit with myself, and after 30 minutes, it's like, yeah, I'm still really, really hungry. Of course, I'm going to go eat. I'm honoring that hunger signal. However, if it's been about, 15 minutes after my meal and I ate an adequate amount of food at the dinner table, and then I'm like 15 minutes later feel like I'm hungry, and I sit with myself for another 15 minutes and I don't feel like an active hunger signal, like I said, my stomach is growling, I'm going to dismiss that and not just go and grab something out of habit. I'm going to listen to my body and also honor my full signal. And that, again, is when you have to be in tune with your body. So you can see how layered this is. This is more of, I would say, a holistic approach to fat loss. It's not the bodybuilder method. It's not, personal trainer kind of method. It's more of how can we just adjust and add in habits that support this versus feeling like we're constantly restricting. A piece of that is listening to your hunger and full signals. So if you don't know how many calories you're eating, first off, you need to kind of have a general idea of that. So if you don't want to track every single day, you don't need to. However, if you want to approach this by tracking, I would say track for sure for a week just to see kind of daily what your average intake is without changing anything, right? So this is kind of that pre-work. For a week, you're not going to change anything, and you're going to see how many calories you're consuming. Be very honest with yourself and use an app like Chronometer. versus MyFitnessPal. Again, I love their focus on energy versus calories. MyFitnessPal, I feel like, also always puts clients in way too extreme of a deficit to align with their goal, and they don't factor in things like breastfeeding, physical activity level necessarily. And like I said, Chronometer actually adjusts if you've been physically active that day, and it also adjusts depending on what your lifestyle and your goals are. It also takes things at a slower pace. MyFitnessPal, I feel like, would give you a program if you wanted to lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks. It could give you a program like that. Chronometer, you really can't manipulate to do that. For me, although I did put in a weight goal, I don't necessarily care about what the weight is. Like I said, I don't even know what I weigh right now. But it has me projected to be at the ideal weight, in a sense, by October. So it's taking things very slow, and that is what I like. Like I said, this is the long game. This is not the short, quick fix game. It's also so much more focused on what you can add in to support your body versus what you have to remove and restrict to honestly deplete your body. So again, give yourself a week without changing anything, and then see what you need to do, how you can adjust your eating habits to meet the goals of your tracker. And then from there, I would say give yourself maybe 2 to 3 weeks to actively track, just so you know how many calories are in something. Although, there's not necessarily an obsession around calories when we're looking at fat loss. There's more of a increasing in protein, making sure that's a priority, high fiber, and then filling in the gaps with other foods. There is still going to need to be a deficit there. And when you know how many calories are in something, it at least gives you a better picture of how much of that you can actually add into your diet versus having to, you can just play around with the calorie component. But like I said, 200 to 300 calories is max of what I would say to have a deficit in. So most people, if you are pretty sedentary and maybe you work out 2 to 3 times a week, you probably on average burn about 2,000 calories per day. You'd want to be at about 1,800 calories or 1,700 calories. Still very, very doable. It might feel a little bit harder, like I said, if you're not exercising to get to that number. So that's where then the movement piece for sure should come into that. For most clients that I work with, I don't recommend tracking for longer than 2 to 3 weeks. However, in every season, there's going to be adjustments. For me, I'm tracking for about 6 weeks. That is kind of my goal. So because I started tracking 5 weeks postpartum, so by 11 weeks postpartum, I would like to wrap up tracking because I would have a general idea of how much I'm consuming day to day and what I need to eat to meet my protein and my calorie intake goals. Again, thinking about how we can eat enough, not constantly to be thinking about how we can eat as little as possible. You want to be eating enough. And I think honestly, most people are not eating enough, and maybe even just not eating enough of the right foods, which is what causes maybe weight gain in certain areas like your midsection, because you could be eating enough, but what you're eating is maybe coming in the form of a lot of breads, crackers, cheese, dairy, not necessarily in the form of protein like steak, eggs, chicken, ham, you know the drill. So just things to think about. And of course, you can make adjustments as you start tracking. Again, know your relationship with tracking and only do it for as long as you really feel comfortable, and make sure it doesn't become an obsessive thing. So that's why I kind of am giving myself personally that goal of 6 weeks to be tracking, because I know I'm not going to go back to the habit then of tracking for 2 years, because that was not a healthy thing. Also, consider giving yourself weekly breaks. Now, for me, this looks like actually not tracking anything on the weekends. You have to find the balance in this, and that doesn't mean that I completely go crazy on the weekends, and that's why I don't track. I don't track on the weekends because I'm typically eating maybe at my parents' house, or we have things like Easter that come up, and I trust my body and I trust myself. I trust my hunger and full signals, and I have a general awareness around what I need to be eating to feel good. So I don't track on the weekends, and I think that is totally fine. But again, it's not tracking on the weekends because I want to go and drink a bunch of alcohol and drink a ton of pop and have dessert for every single meal multiple times a day. That would be not finding the balance in tracking. You can find balance doing all of those things, but that should not be kind of your what you do if you're not tracking on the weekends. I try to keep things very similar every single day of the week. My life is honestly probably pretty boring in that sense. We typically eat the same things. I know for supper, I'm always going to have a dessert at the end of my meal every single day of the week. And that's just kind of how I go about that. Also, if you're eating a snack or if you're eating a meal, I'm going to reiterate this. Focus on eating your protein first and then fill in the gaps with your veggies, your fats, and your carbohydrates, your starchy carbs. Think of what you can add more of versus what you need to remove. Not to say there aren't things you could replace or find smart swaps for, but your smart swap for ranch should not be a sugar-free or fat-free ranch. Stick with like a Chosen Foods as the brand, or Primal Kitchen type of brand of ranch. That would be a smart swap, not necessarily the sugar-free, fat-free version of something that you love right now. Okay, and then I'm going to go off of, I feel like I've already been talking for a very, very long time. So I'm going to just go into water intake, and then I'm actually going to do a whole other episode just on physical activity and building strength, because that is such a huge component. But I really feel like the eating piece of this is enough to focus on for a while, especially if you actively want to practice this. So if we look at your water intake, you're going to do your weight in pounds divided by 2.2 times your age. Now weight on your age, because it's going to be a different number. So if you're younger than 30, the number you're going to use for age is 40. If you're 30 to 55, the number you're going to use is 35. And if you're older than 55, or if you're 55 plus, you're going to use the number 30 for your age. So again, it's weight in pounds divided by 2.2, multiplied by your age, which for me, that would be 40, divided by 28.3. Now that's going to give you how many ounces. So for me, I got 86.7 ounces per day. I'm adding even just a little bit more up into that. So I'm about 104 is my goal, I believe. And you can adjust that on the app that I'm using to track. Again, if you're not tracking using an app, get a water bottle, know how many ounces are in that, and know how many of those water bottles you need per day to meet that goal. So for me, I need 4 of my 24-ounce water bottles per day to meet my goal. And then that is also a way where you don't have to use an app to track. You can just use a tactic like how many ounces are in your water bottle, try to have 4 of them. There you go, you've met your goal. That's also not accounting for maybe any other liquids you have outside of your water, but you're for sure always going to meet that if you are able to utilize kind of that water bottle approach. Okay, so I'm actually going to wrap up today's episode here because I'm already an hour and 10 minutes into this. And there's just a lot when it comes to nutrition that I wanted to cover and talk about. A lot of these concepts might not be new, but there are some adjustments you might want to make if you're focusing, again, like I said, on fat loss. I want to reiterate, you're not looking at depleting your body. You're looking at nourishing your body and nourishing your body well. So for me, that looks like tracking in this season of life, just for, like I said, 6 weeks, because I want to know that I'm eating enough. And I think when we're able to view it that way, it feels much less daunting. Also, finding something you like tracking. MyFitnessPal, I hated. Chronometer is fun because I don't feel like, it doesn't feel dreadful. You can also add in like custom recipes. You can also track your water. It feels more of like a game. It doesn't feel daunting. And truthfully, it probably takes me 5 to 10 minutes a day total to do this. I'm not saying you have to track. I'm just saying if you feel like you don't have any awareness around calories or how many calories you're consuming and you're not sure if you're in a deficit, or if you don't know how much protein is in something, like I said, looking at a 4-ounce steak, I know that's probably about 40 grams of protein. Tracking is nice because it gives you that awareness. Like I said, I've tracked for 2 years, so I probably have I would say it would be unhealthy at this point, knowledge of how many calories are in something. It's something I just know. I could look at something and probably tell you how many calories are in it. That's why we're also not tracking forever and ever. 6 weeks, maybe max, is the goal I want you to give yourself if you're interested in tracking. Again, just so you have an awareness around protein and around calorie intake. All right, so hopefully this episode was not too overwhelming. Again, there are some just minor adjustments maybe you need to make. Maybe they feel a little bit more major. But know yourself and know your body, know your relationship with food and your body. If this is not something that feels like it's very comfy for you right now, no need to implement this, but These are things that I wish I would have known when I got started wanting to just lose weight. I didn't know fat loss really was a thing. I really just always viewed it as weight loss, and I wanted to lose as much as possible and as fast as possible. Not the healthiest, most sustainable way to do something. And this is something, like I said, it's the long game. This is something where you should be thinking about 6 weeks out, 4 months out. Even, for me, I'm like, well, if it took 9 months to grow a human, I'm going to give myself 9 months of grace to build that muscle and really get my body to a point where I feel strong and I feel confident and I feel very comfortable in it again. And so that's just something I know it's not going to happen overnight. As much as maybe a part of me wants it to be a quick fix, I know this is a much more sustainable and a much more positive way to approach this than something that is going to leave me depleted, leave me for sure having hair loss, even just nail thinness. I've had so many negative symptoms when I was just constantly depleting my body. You should never, ever, ever be at that 1,200 calorie mark. I would say maybe 1,700 calories would be the lowest I would ever go. Even if you're not right now exercising or strength training, that is the lowest you should go, just to make sure you're still in a deficit, but you are not constantly depleting your body and undernourishing it. The more muscle mass you build and the stronger you feel, the more you focus on protein, you probably will actually find yourself more in that 2,300 calorie range to even 3,000 calories. And that's going to be different for male and female. But when you're able to get that metabolism regulated, you're able to build muscle that can break down fat and also break down sugar in your blood so that you're no longer in those pre-diabetic or insulin resistant ranges. That really comes from building muscle, and we can't get around that, which is why next week's conversation is going to be so good around physical activity. And I've had people on in the past to talk about this. I'm going to see if maybe I can get my brother on the podcast to talk about this, because it's something I know he's deep dove well into, is around physical activity and strength training. I really trust his knowledge and really just his opinion, right? All of that this is our opinion. This is my personal experience and the research and the education I have, the certifications I have to share this with you. Yes, those are valid, but part of it is also my personal experience. So having somebody on to talk about physical activity and building strength, I think would be really, really big, just because you can't get around it. Truthfully, in my opinion, you can't get around building muscle mass, building strength if you want to lose fat. I just don't believe you can. So we are going to deep dive into that all next week. But if you're interested in following along with my life outside of the podcast, you can find me at Nourish with Bailey on Instagram. That is definitely where I'm the most active. If you have not heard back from me and you've inquired about coaching, no, I will be getting back to you around May 19 when I'm actually back in office. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with past clients and connecting with the new ones that I'm just so eager to meet and get to know. So if that is you or you want that to be you, go ahead and look at the description of today's episode. There's all my information down there, information about programs and what you can do right now to get started without even needing that one-on-one coaching aspect. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend, and I'll talk to you again next Wednesday. Bye.